lovely virtual introduction. Am I standing in the right spot? Great. Hey, so thank you very much for having me along today. What I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about my story, although that was actually a really good introduction, so maybe that's covered most of it. I'll give you a little bit more detail. I'm then going to talk to you about why this topic is important, so why celebrating this day, talking about breaking the bias, and talking about having women in well-paid, meaningful work, and why that's good for everybody. So that's sort of the second point. And then what I'm going to go through is some of the findings that have come out of my research, and I'm going to talk through some of the barriers that are existing for women. And then the good bit is how do we then remove them and give some sort of practical suggestions for how we can remove some of those barriers. So I hope that sounds okay. Awesome. Okay, so my story, which is, I think it's important because it kind of shapes and gives colour to where this has all come from. So as said, I spent 10 years in the army and I had a fabulous time. So often people assume that because I'm in this sort of area and I have passion around making things better for women, I must have had a rubbish time in the New Zealand Army. That is just could not be further from the truth. So I had a brilliant time in the army, was so lucky, got to deploy on multiple operations, worked with some fabulous people, got to undertake all kinds of exciting training, physical challenges, exciting adventures, and loved it. And so I'm always really careful to kind of put that out there so people know, I did have a great time in the army. When I then decided to transition out, I decided that I should do an MBA. My undergraduate degree was in economics. I really enjoyed business, and I thought it would be good to kind of up my CV a little bit as I left the army. And actually very exciting, my colleague from the MBA is here today, which is very exciting. So did that, and that was great. And then off the back of it, at the last part of the MBA, you had to write like a dissertation or sort of a mini thesis. And I got a good mark. I'm not saying that to brag, but it lulled me into a very false sense of security. So I got this, good mark, and I thought, well, maybe I could just do a PhD. Surely it won't be that much harder. It's just that, but a little bit bigger. Won't be too much of a drama. And so I was like, right, I like a personal challenge, so I want to get myself one of those. It'd be quite nifty. I just need a topic. And so I thought, okay, what do I know? What am I interested in? And I thought, well, I'm a woman, so I'm interested in that. I like working, so, something to do with women in the workforce, and my background's the army. So yeah, I think I'll focus on that. And that was the starting point. So it wasn't that I came into it thinking, I want to research this topic because there's a problem and I need to solve it. It was just, I needed a vehicle to get myself the qualification that I wanted. So, got into this research. And what happened is the more I got into it, the more interested I actually became in what it was that I was researching. And I interviewed a whole lot of women who had served in the New Zealand Army, just as I had. And I asked them really general questions. So I certainly wasn't trying to say, hey, tell me the crappy bits and tell me what was rough. It was just really general questions. What was it like being in the army? What were your leadership experiences like? What were some of the memorable moments? Things like that, really kind of general questions. And when I got the data and I started analysing it, what I found was two things. Firstly, all of the women that I interviewed also had fabulous experiences. So just like me, they talked about so many wonderful things that they enjoyed about their military service. So that's that. But there was a but. What I also found is that there were these recurring themes of negative experiences that were specifically related to gender. And what I also found when I delved into this more and more is that, yes, I was interviewing women from the military, and so some of those experiences were military specific, but when I did more and more research, actually they were really applicable across far more sectors than just the military. And so when I found these sort of recurring negative themes, it also caused me to reflect a little bit more on my own experience. And so while I still say that I loved my time in the army, I'm really proud of my service, I'm really proud to talk about the army as an amazing career, and I still promote it, what I did realise is that maybe not everything was quite as sunshine and rainbows as I thought it had been. There were actually some challenging experiences. And so that was quite depressing. I think you mentioned the word before, depressing. It was. I was like, oh, this is a bit shit. I've uncovered all this stuff about this organisation I love, and there's actually some pretty crappy things happening to women. This is a bit sad. So I thought, well, I want to do something about it. I've spent all these bloody years doing this research. I want to do something with it. So I approached the New Zealand Army again. So this is as a civilian at this point. I'd left the organisation. And I said, look, Army, you have these publicly stated goals where you want to increase the representation of women, and, to put it bluntly, you're failing. You've had the same proportion of women for the last 2 decades with no improvement. And I reckon I could help you. I said, I've done all this research, I've got all this information on all these experiences and challenges that women are experiencing. If you know this stuff, I reckon it could help, and then you could do something about it. So what was really exciting is that I then spent this sort of 18-month journey advising to the New Zealand Army. So I was working really closely with the Chief of the New Zealand Army, General John Boswell, who I rate very highly. So worked with him and his senior leadership team. And basically, over the period of time, shared the research that I had already done, also then conducted a bunch more research for them, and shared the challenges that women were experiencing, but more importantly, what can they then do about it? And shared, hey, these are some of the things that you can do to make things better for women. And guess what? It will also make it better for men. And this is something that I'm also really excited to share with people, because sometimes I talk to organisations and they think, oh, well, if we make it better for women, that's going to be at the expense of men, or that's going to be at the expense of organisational performance, or at the expense of profits. No, that's a bunch of crock. You know what I was trying to say. Anyway, so I'm going to get back to that. So the point is, did this, spent this period of time, and certainly I'm not saying, yeah, tick solved, army sorted, culture's perfect for women now. I cannot claim that. It still has a long way to go. And culture change takes a long time. So it's certainly not fixed and solved. But what I'm really excited about is that the army has come a long way. I started my service almost 20 years ago, 2003. And what they are now, their commitment to doing something about this is really impressive. They've got a huge program of work underway. They've already implemented a number of the kind of easy recommendations, and they've got a commitment to do something more to address the really tricky stuff. So that's exciting. So what happened from there is I got asked to speak at a few different events. And I loved talking, and I was like, oh, that's great. People want to hear me talk about this. This is exciting. And so what I did is I talked about basically what I've just shared with you now, but expanded out on it, my experience of serving in the military, then researching the military, and then advising to the military. And when I was asked to speak, the people organising this event said, could you try and kind of hone in on the topics that would be most relevant to the corporate sector? And as I alluded to before, actually all the topics are relevant, but I really honed in on kind of the working mum part of it. And then after this, so this was sort of, a couple of years ago, all these working mums just started reaching out to me all across New Zealand, including some from Australia, from a variety of different organisations. And they just wanted to tell me their story about being a working mum. And they were quite mixed. So some of them were reaching out to me because they wanted to tell me about their positive experiences and said, hey, I had this great experience, where others, that was not the case. And what happened is I kept hearing the same story over and over again. And once again, it was sort of this depressing set of research findings. It wasn't intended to be a proper research project, but I kind of couldn't help myself from putting on my research hat and sort of making a note of everything. And once again, I realised, there are some issues happening here. Women, and especially mums on this particular topic, are experiencing issues in the workplace, and we need to do something about it. So then I kind of just kept thinking about this in terms of, these things are happening, we need to change it. And I kind of got a bee in my bonnet and ended up, so this sort of second part was happening while I was on maternity leave with baby number 2. So I've got a 4-year-old and an 18-month-old. And I've been on maternity leave from NZTE, Trade and Enterprise, which I love, great organisation. But I was just so passionate about this. I was like, shit, I think I'm going to have to start a business. If I want to pursue this and make this my passion, I don't think I can go back to NZTE because I'm not going to have time to do NZTE stuff. I need to pursue this. So that's what I've done. I've launched my own business. It's fucking terrifying. sorry. It's not being terrifying. You don't get a paycheck every week. It's quite hard. Anyway, so starting this business around improving the workplace for women. So that's kind of my journey, and I wanted to tell that to hopefully show that I know some stuff about this topic. I've researched it pretty thoroughly, but I'm also living it. So as I say, I'm a mum, I'm a woman, I'm in the workforce, and I'm really passionate about trying to make things better for women. But there's also a second driver here. I'm also really passionate about making organisations better. So my experience during the MBA, my private sector experience, and then working at NZTE, where my role was to help organisations to grow and especially to grow internationally, all of that is around helping organisations to do better, which I'm also really interested about. And at the start, I thought that maybe these two things didn't line up. You know, if I was going to try and make it better for women, maybe that wasn't always going to be, you know, what the organisation wanted to achieve. But as I mentioned before, the exciting thing is actually these two things are super aligned. So in the Army, we were taught something called the functional leadership model, which was, what do you call, 3 circles, Venn diagram. And 3 circles was that one of them was the individual, another was the team, and then the other was the task. And that if you wanted to achieve the task, you had to kind of give equal effort to the individuals, the team, and the task. And if you spent too much time catering to the needs of the individual, that would be at the expense of the task. But what I've learned is that I don't believe that that's correct. If you put effort and investment into making things better for the individual, you actually grow the other 2 circles as well. If individuals are happy and individuals are motivated and feeling good about themselves at work, it's also good for the team and it's also good for the task, i.e. the organisational output. So isn't that lovely when 2 things align? So what I'm going to talk about now is why this is important. So we're talking about break the bias, trying to make things better for women in the workforce. Why do we care about that? So the first thing I'm going to put out there is that it's just the right thing to do. So we don't actually need a business case for why it is right to make sure that 1/2 of the population, women, feel valued and included at work. So if people think, oh, well, why do I bother about that? I need a business case. No, it's just an ethically and morally right thing to do, right? I mean, I hope people agree with that. We shouldn't need a business case to justify why you should be good to all the humans out there. You know, so that's my first thing. So that's just putting it out there. But there actually is also a business case. So that's, you know, it's an iffy bonus. So on the business case side, we've got diversity and then we've got inclusion. So diversity is basically talking about you've got a mix. So in the very crude form, think about a crayon box, you've got one of each colour. But sorry, by colour, I don't mean skin colour, I mean one of each colour in terms of one of each type, right? So great, we've got a woman, we've got a man. There's lots of other forms of diversity, but today we're talking about gender. And so diversity in itself is really important because you actually need a diverse range of perspectives. And as the introduction said before, you know, when you are, as a business, trying to reach a whole lot of different clients, whether they are direct to consumers or whether you're a business-to-business type organisation, the people that buy your product are a variety of different people, men and women. And so in your organisation, if you want to do well to cater your customers or clients, you actually need to have people that are representative of that population, which includes both genders. The other thing is, if you want to do really good in an organisation or with a task or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, having diverse perspectives is a really good way. Like, if everything that happens in terms of progress in the world is when we have new ideas. So if you've got a bunch of clones that all look and think and talk the same, and you're not going to make progress. What you need is different ideas to make progress. Does that make sense? So that's diversity, and that's kind of one side of it. But if you just have diversity and not inclusion, well, then that's not very helpful, okay? So diversity means jack shit unless you've got inclusion as well. And with inclusion, what often gets added to it now is also equity and belonging. So I'm just going to say inclusion, but that's sort of what I mean. There's all 3 of those things, equity and belonging as well. And those sides of it mean that each of those diverse people with the diverse backgrounds, they feel valued when they come to work. They feel that they belong. They feel that their contribution is meaningful. They feel that they're treated with respect. And what that means, again, back to this, it's just the right thing to do. Isn't that good that people should come to work and feel that way? But it also means that they bring the best version of themselves. And as an organisation, if you want to get the best out of your people, you want them to bring the best version of themselves. Because if they don't, and if they don't feel included and they don't really feel like they belong or that they're valued, they don't perform nearly as well. You know, it's just total wasted potential, which is just a huge shame for the economy and for that organisation. So that's one of the reasons why inclusion is so important. So you need the diversity because you want the different range of perspectives. You want to be able to relate with the various people you're selling your product to, but then you need to make sure that those diverse people are all included so that they feel safe to bring the diverse perspectives. Does that make sense? Cool. So that's kind of the diversity inclusion side. And I'm just going to give you a real life example, which I'm kind of living through at the moment, to hopefully further demonstrate why this stuff is important. So just a bit of a side note, but it's pretty relevant and huge to my life at the moment. I am involved as a volunteer helping people to evacuate from Afghanistan. I've been doing it for the last 6 months, and it's really fucking hard. So I served in Afghanistan, worked with a bunch of locals over there, and if you guys have seen in the news, not a very good situation in Afghanistan at the moment. And so myself and 3 others, we've formed this team of random volunteers, and we are evacuating these people. And I just want to explain the task a little bit, just for the purpose of saying, hopefully you can relate to it. It's a very complicated task, right? So we are literally liaising with people on the other side of the world who don't speak English and who don't have access to technology. We are trying to liaise with our government as well as third country governments and neighbouring countries. We're trying to raise money to fund these evacuation operations. We're trying to arrange logistics. It's a very complex task, and it is the most phenomenally difficult thing I've ever been in my life, and it's really, really hard. But we are getting there. We're not finished yet, but we've so far got about 80% of the people out. So we've got 20% more to go. So I wasn't saying that to be like, oh, look, aren't I great? So please, that's not what I mean. But what I'm trying to say is it's an example of a phenomenally difficult task. But the reason that we are having success with it is because we have a diverse team and we have inclusion. So I'll just elaborate that a little bit further. So in this team, the similarities is that we all have military backgrounds, right? So there's 4 of us, myself and the other 3 are guys. And they are 3 of the most phenomenal people I've ever worked with. But we are really different. So the 4 of us have quite different personalities, really different approaches to how we do things, very different backgrounds, very different preferences. We are genuinely a very diverse team, and we kind of talk about it quite a bit in terms of the various ways that we're quite different. But we are really good at including each other. So we have some pretty robust discussions where we don't agree about things, but we always feel safe to bring our opinion and know that we'll be respected and treated with respect and with kindness, even if it gets shot down and we go in a different direction. Everyone feels that they can bring their best selves to this situation, and that is what is helping to achieve this task. So does that make sense? It's kind of this real life living example of when you've got a complicated task and you know it's pretty hard to achieve it. Diversity and then inclusion around that is really, really helpful. So I'm going to park on that. Have I hopefully rammed it home enough why this is quite important? Okay, cool. So now what I'm going to get onto is the research in terms of what are some of the barriers that women are experiencing and how can we fix it? Does that sound useful? Okay. So from the research that I did, so partially kind of the PhD research, which was sort of women in the workplace in general, and then the second research project was really focusing in on working mums. That part's actually extended further now to be working parents, which is good, right? Because dads are parents too. And I've interviewed a lot more fathers about these experiences as well. So these are some of the barriers. Sorry, give me 2 seconds. Okay, so when we think about the construct of work and how work is constructed, it was made up roughly 100 years ago. So in line with Henry Ford's car manufacturing era, which was literally a century ago, the 9 to 5, 40-hour week, that's when that was dreamed up. And at that point, that was great. Henry Ford did some great things for the people of that time. But the demographics of the workforce then were so different to the demographics of the workforce today. So back then, work was basically men. Home was basically women. So it was completely designed around this idea that a worker is not also a primary caregiver for a child, because that's literally what it was. The man went to work, the woman sat at home. And so women have now been in the workforce for decades, right? This is new 2022 thing. We've been around for a while now. And men are also contributing more and more to the home force. Unfortunately, the burden of the majority of childcare is still falling more on women than it is men, and that's another thing we need to tackle. But the point is, men are playing more and more of a role in the home force compared to what they've ever done in the past. So with these changes in the demographics of the workforce, there have not been changes in the structure of the workforce. It has stayed the same. Yeah, sure, there's a little bit more flexibility these days, and yes, COVID has absolutely fundamentally accelerated that conversation. But actually, we're still basically doing things the same way that we've been doing for 100 years. And those structures are really causing these kind of issues where women are not as well represented in the workforce. And so if we want to do better at increasing the representation of women in the workforce, and to do that, you need to increase their ability to do their work, then well-paid, meaningful work, and to feel valued, we need to do something about these structures. So some of the approaches that people have been doing so far are a lot of things that focus on the women. Now, they are great, so I'm not knocking that, and I want to be really clear that I'm not being kind of condescending or belittling any of those approaches. So things like women in leadership programs, coaching for women, all those sorts of things are really good, genuinely. So I want to be clear, they are really good things, but they are band-aids. Unless we change the structures, we can't just expect women to learn some things and then somehow they're going to magically survive in the structure that has not changed for 100 years. So when we look at the structures, and this is what I'm going to get to now, these are some of the things that came out. And these are some of the things that organizations can do to remove these structures. So one of them is around what I kind of call like basic infrastructure type stuff. And in fact, it was mentioned on the talk before, which I love. Did someone in the construction sector here put their hand up? I think I saw it. Did I just imagine that? We talk about construction uniforms, maybe. Oh, yes. So this is just one really basic example. There are a lot of organizations where the equipment and the uniforms that they have are designed for men. And that's fine. Men, were the people that were wearing those uniforms. So it makes sense to design them for them. But when you then have women in the workplace, you actually then need to design a uniform that fits their body. And so this was a really interesting one for me when I was working in the military, which is, of course, dominated by men. So for the 10 years that I served and I wore my camouflage uniform, there was not a woman's version. It was just the man's uniform, and that's what you wear. And so I kind of looked like a bit of a sack most of the time because, it didn't fit well. And interestingly, in the military, dress and bearing is really important. Looking really professional, smart, ironing your uniform, polishing your shoes and all that kind of stuff was very important. But if you have a uniform that kind of hangs off you because your shoulders aren't big enough and, your boobs are kind of bulging in the wrong place, and especially women who have wider hips, like just really unflattering uniforms, right? And you don't look as professional in them. And so that was one of my biggest recommendations, was design uniforms and equipment that actually fit all of the people within your organization. And I just think that's kind of a basic one. I sometimes think, I don't even know why I'm telling them all this. It seems obvious. So that's kind of the first one. The second one is around recruiting processes. And there's two parts to this. The first one is around imaging. And it kind of goes back further to not just recruiting, but attraction. So how do you even get women even interested in this particular career path or industry or job sector? And if all the imaging is of men, like, no surprises, guys, not many women are going to be interested in it. There's literally the saying, you can't be what you can't see. So on the military side of the house, I went through and I analysed all the recruiting material that they'd used over this period of time. Do you think there were many women in those ads? No. Even when you looked at like the proportion of women in the army is 13%, but the portion of women in these adverts was like 7% or something pathetic. So, really no effort there to increase them. And when they did have women in those advertisements, they were doing the really like token, sedentary, office work, administration type stuff. And sorry, that came out from nothing wrong about that work, but it doesn't really reflect what you do in the military. And so even that created another kind of barrier for why women were not even applying. So one of the things, I've had conversations with a number of senior managers in organizations, very good men, genuinely really, really good humans, who were saying, I would love to recruit more women, but they just don't apply. So, I can't really do anything about that. Yes, you can. Actually, what you can do is look at the way you put images out there. So whether that's maybe recruiting images, what have you got in the media? What are the pictures that you've got on your website? What are the pictures you've got internally in terms of, I don't know, like pamphlets and posters on the wall and annual reports and all that kind of stuff? What are the images that you have in those? And what kind of messages are they sending around, is this a career for women? And what a lot of people find is, oh yeah, shit, 80% of those images are guys. No wonder we don't have many women applying. So that's a second barrier that can be fixed actually relatively easily. So that those first two, uniforms and equipment, and recruiting images, that's actually pretty easy stuff to fix. The next one is around this concept of authentic leadership. So when we talk about being authentic or authenticity, the crux of it is, and I could go on for details about all the nitty-gritty, but the crux of it is being able to be yourself, right? So if you can be authentic, it means you can be yourself. Now, if you can be yourself, that means you can put your best foot forward as yourself and do the best job of work. If you feel like you always have to be somebody that you are not, no matter how hard you try, you'll never ever reach your potential and be anywhere near as good as if you were just being yourself. So the research that I did, and this is, again, case study with the army, but I went much broader than that, so this is very relevant to the corporate sector as well, is that a lot of women felt that the way that leaders are taught to be leaders is at one end of the spectrum. So there's two ends of the spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, you've got a leader who's very, very decisive, very kind of directive, very assertive, very kind of regimental. I'm using a lot of army terms here, but they are the terms, right? So that kind of type of leader. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got leaders who are very kind of collaborative, very relationship focused, really inclusive. Now, both of those are really good. So I'm not saying that the one at that end is a bad thing. It's not. But what we find is that that is how most people, or the majority of leadership, is taught. So whether that's in the military or in the corporate sector or in various other organizations, that is how leadership is often taught at that end, and at the kind of discrediting these types of leadership approaches. And so what this has meant that in the workplace is another structural barrier that women are facing. And that when it comes to managers who are reviewing their staff, who might get a promotion or who might get a pay rise and various other things, what's happening, and some of this is unconscious, it's not managers deliberately thinking, you know, I don't want to promote that woman, but they see a man that's been really decisive and very assertive, and they think, oh, that's a great leadership quality, I'm going to promote that person. And what they don't always observe is a woman, and I'm breaking this down into men and women. Let me be very clear, both men and women can be both versions of that, right? So I just want to make that clear. Absolutely, there are women who are this type of leader, and there are men that are that type of leader. But what I am saying is that the majority of women that I researched more naturally or more authentically were at that end of the scale. Yet, in our workplaces, that is the type that we are rewarding and promoting. And so how organizations can look at tackling this is firstly just being aware of it, right? So when we think about what are the things that we are evaluating our staff on in terms of whether we promote them into leadership positions, whether we, give them pay rises or whatever it is, what is it that we are valuing? And if it's always those skills and we're not actually valuing these skills, that is a real barrier for women. And it's actually also a barrier for a lot of men. And the other thing that what we need to remember is that those skills are actually bloody useful, right? So if you've got a leader who is really collaborative and likes to get opinions from lots of different people before making a decision, I mean, isn't that a good thing, right? And if you've got a leader who's really focused on developing relationships and caring about their staff, isn't that a good thing? So again, I'm not saying that these things are bad. Being really decisive and being assertive, that's also a really great quality, but it's not the only great quality. And that's sort of the point that I'm trying to make here. And just to give you a tangible example, this is from my days in the army. This is a topic that I found in the research that resonated particularly strongly. So I am very bubbly, I'm friendly, I'm a bit full on, right? So I talk a lot, I get excited, I get passionate, and I'm sorry, people on the screen are like, they're crazy women waving their hands. Sorry. But that's me, right? That's how I am. And when I was in the army, I was often told by my managers, never by my staff, who, I mean, sure, some of my staff probably thought I was a dick, but most of them genuinely thought I was a good leader. And I know that because they told me, right? So, yep, I mucked up in some areas, I was a dick, some people didn't like me, but generally speaking, I know that I was an effective leader. I know that because we achieved mission success and my people grew. So I know that I was, at best reasonable. Maybe not brilliant, but at best, I was reasonable. Anyway, I would often be told by my managers, who of course were all men, I didn't have a single female boss when I was in the army. I'd always be told, Lieutenant Ford, also Ford's my maiden name, you've got to kind of tone it down, friendliness, not an approach we like to see in a leader. You care too much, that's not a good thing. You're bubbly, no. And so, because when I was in the military, I was such a sucker, and I don't like to be in trouble, and I like to do well. And so I'd have really good performance reports about, X, Y, and Z, but then like D was that you're too friendly. And so I remember being like, well, sir, what can I do better? Yes, sir, sir, I want to do better. What can I do? And I remember this advice, and it really stuck in my head. He said to me, well, Ellen, maybe just don't smile as much at your soldiers. And I took that on. I look at it now, I'm like, what a crap. But at the time, I was like, oh my gosh, that's like asking me not to breathe. I like smiling. And And then I felt really bad about it. So what happened is for me, so when I talked about the women's experiences, some of them, what they do is they then change. So they start being more kind of masculine in their approach because they think that's what's needed. And that's not a good outcome either, right? Like people spending all these days at work being someone they're not, that's not helpful. But then the other group kept being natural or authentic to themselves, which is what I did, but always felt a little bit bad about it. So I remember like I'd be in the room, happy, fun, and got excited because I just start fizzing and I get all excited about something. And then I'd leave the room and be like, oh, shit, that was naughty. Like, oh, I might get in trouble for that. And then would feel like quite consciously bad about myself, that smiling and being happy was a bad thing. And it wasn't until I left the army and then did this big research journey that I actually even realized this. And I looked back and was like, oh, shit, okay, that actually wasn't that pleasant. And it was interesting because since then I've been given nice feedback about the fact that I'm quite friendly, and that's actually not a bad thing in a leader. So anyway, that's one of the other approaches. So what have I talked about so far? The uniforms and equipment, recruiting, and then I've just touched on authentic leadership. 2 more to go. So number 4 is what I'm going to talk about is kind of like a culture of kind of nastiness. So when I say nastiness, there's a bit of a spectrum. So at one end of the spectrum, you've got what I'd call, say, minor incivility. So kind of like not very nice comments, a little bit of a bully, maybe sort of some casual low-level harassment. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum, which is the really nasty stuff, right? So really kind of overt discrimination, really very nasty harassment, bullying at the greater end. And then, you know, genuinely in the military, this is an issue, but it's certainly an issue beyond that as well. We've got the really nasty stuff in terms of sexual harm. So whether that's sexual harassment or even assault, there's a spectrum. And what I found in the research journey is that women in all workplaces are experiencing a degree of this. Whether it's at the minor end or further along, I have not yet interviewed a woman that has not experienced anything on that scale, right? And that's sad. You know, that is really sad. You know, I'm happy that not all of them have experienced things at this end, but it is sad to know that all of them have experienced something at this end. And I acknowledge, actually, there'll be a lot of men that have also experienced things along this spectrum. But when it comes to kind of culture, which is sort of where I'm talking around this topic, is if you have an environment where this kind of stuff is tolerated, it fundamentally increases the chance of this stuff happening. So I just want to say that again. If you have an environment where it is tolerable to say kind of the lower level stuff, fundamentally it is more likely that the really bad stuff happens. Likewise, in terms of being able to report these behaviours. So if you have an environment where a person does not feel empowered or safe to report the lower level stuff, likewise, they're far less likely to report the really bad stuff. And that's really concerning. So what often happens in these examples, and I'll kind of share them to hopefully add a bit of colour to this, is that what might happen, you might be saying in a group of people, let's just say there's 10 people in a group, and one of them is a dickhead. And that dickhead says something kind of nasty to one of the people in the group. In this example, a woman, right? Now, the other 8 guys standing around, they don't say anything mean. They're all lovely and pleasant, but they don't say anything to stop it. And so this is one of the biggest issues. We talk about, have you heard of the concept of the bystander effect? Or do you know what I mean by bystander? So it's not that those 8 guys are bad, not at all. Like, they're probably thinking in their head, oh my God, I wish that dickhead would shut up. Or, oh God, I can't believe he said that. What a prat. But if he doesn't say anything to the individual who did it, that person thinks, well, everyone thought that was fine. You know, that was accepted. I guess it's okay to do that again. And also potentially, next time I might up the ante a little bit and keep testing the waters. And this sounds like, oh, surely that doesn't happen. Like, that sounds a bit silly. But it does. There is so much research, both from my own research, from both studies, and also like tons of literature that I've read about this, is that if you tolerate the kind of the little stuff, it fundamentally increases the occurrences of the really bad stuff. So what can organizations do about this? I use the term kind of like nip it in the bud and help teach your people how to speak up and how to feel safe to speak up. So, you know, it's quite daunting. You know, if you're one of those other 8 people in the group, you don't necessarily feel safe to tell that person they're a dickhead in front of everybody. But how do you help them to maybe have that conversation one-on-one afterwards and say, look, hey, I think what you said might have actually really offended that other person in the group. maybe this is a different way that you could have phrased it. And what I have heard a bit of pushback in this before, I've heard people say, oh, well, you know, you can't have a bloody joke anymore. You know, PC gone mad. You know, oh gosh, I can't say anything now because I'm going to offend someone. To that, I just say, well, you must be quite unintelligent. So, sorry, that sounds a bit shitty, but it kind of is. So, like, if you are not able to have a joke and have fun without fundamentally making somebody else feel bad about themselves, then really that is quite unintelligent. So when I think about the teams that I've worked in, so at NZT, I've got colleagues in the back here from NZTE, I've got Venture Taranaki who I consider as my colleagues, you know, people from my MBA course, people in my current kind of Afghan volunteer task, all these different teams that I've been involved in. We absolutely have fun and take the piss out of each other. And it's fun, like we laugh and we tease each other, but in a really kind way. It's never in a way that is kind of sexually gross or makes people feel uncomfortable that way. And it's not in a way that makes you feel bad because of your gender. And there's a difference. And to me, it feels kind of obvious, but not everyone necessarily sees it that black and white. So when I talk about these kind of like nip it in the bud, it really is about being really clear about there's a difference between being funny and teasing and a bit of banter, and then stuff that's actually fundamentally making someone else feel bad about themselves. Do people get the difference there? And so that's one of the things that organisations can do is really call out the bad stuff, nip it in the bud, don't be a bystander and just let it happen. You know, there's kind of this saying, how does it go? What the standard you walk past is the standard you see. Thank you. Should have practiced that one beforehand. Anyway, that one. And it's true. If you see something, whether it's and we're talking about Gender Day because it's International Women's Day, but any kind of nasty behaviour, whether it's something to do with race, any kind of nastiness behaviour, even if it's not about discrimination, just, you know, bullying in general, do something about it. Don't just let it slide. And the next thing I'd say to that in terms from a leadership point of view is what is measured matters, right? So fundamentally, that's what drives behaviours is KPIs, performance reviews, that kind of thing. So if you want your people to care about doing something about this, you need to actually work out how do you measure this? So when you think about performance reviews that you have with your staff, and then which of course dictate who gets promoted, who gets pay rises, all those kinds of nice things, is have kind of like a criteria in there about like, are you a decent person? And that could be things like, you know, praise people when they call this kind of behaviour out. Give people positive feedback when they do the right things in these settings so that they understand that doing that is valued and actually the organisation really rates and approves of people that do that kind of thing. And then people that are causing the nasty behaviour, make sure that's reflected in their performance review. Don't promote someone who's, you know, a gun and makes lots of money for you, but is a dickhead and makes everyone else feel horrible about themselves. Because that's what happens, right? There are a lot of people who get pay rises and promotions who are kind of assholes, but they make a lot of money. And so we think, oh, well, you know, we can kind of live with it because they make a lot of money. But what the organisation forgets, and again, organisations care about profits. I do get that. I know not everyone, you know, wants to do the right thing ethically and morally just because it's nice. I do get that profits are important. So even though that person's bringing lots of money, great, lovely, but what they're doing is really fundamentally decreasing all these other people's ability to bring in money. And so the overall income that comes into that organisation is less than if that person was removed and all these other people got to shine. Does that make sense? And I know it's a hard call. How do you discipline or kick out like your star financial performer? But when you do it and that kind of rotten apple or bad seed, whatever the thing is goes, and all these other people get to flourish, that makes a real difference. So that's point number 4 around kind of culture and nasty behaviours. The last one. How are we on for time? Sorry, right? We good? Cool. Okay, so the last one. This is like my big crescendo. Sorry, I've oversold it. Oh. Maybe it won't be that good. Okay, sorry. Sorry. The big one. If organisations are really serious about doing things to really improve the representation of women, and we know that's a good thing, right? A, morally, ethically good thing to do, but there's a business case, tick, it's going to be good overall. Fundamentally, we need to take into account children. Let me just say that again. Children, they exist, and if organisations are really serious about making things better and giving women more opportunities to progress, organisations need to fundamentally rethink how they do things when it comes to parents in the workplace. Now, I say parents there, I didn't say mums, I said parents, and there's two reasons for that. What we need to do is ensure that mums, to start with, sorry, not to start with, but in terms of my thought process that I'm about to share with you, I'm starting with mums, is that mums need to be able to attend to their children. That is one of the biggest barriers. You know, I talked about all those other things, but the mum thing is the biggest barrier to increasing the representation of women at all levels and at leadership levels. And so we need to address that. But what we also need to do is address it for dads, and we say parents, because what happens is if we only address it for mums and not for dads, what that means is that the mums, great, they've now got the flexibility to do work and the kids, but the dad doesn't. So poor mum, she's doing all this work and all the kids, whereas dad's just got what I kind of talk about the luxury of just being a worker, right? So yeah, cool, mum, lucky mum, she's got flexibility, but actually she's running around doing most of the kids' stuff and her job, and dad just gets to focus on work, and that ain't good, right? So if we're going to address this, it's not about let's just put in lovely policies for mums. Actually, it's about putting in policies for parents. And then I go a step further. It also includes non-parents. What we need to do is normalise our work hours. So I have started a movement. That sounds a bit grand. No, okay. So I started a movement. Hashtag work school hours. So I won't give the entire talk about that tonight, but I've given a talk about it. Hashtag work school hours. You can check it out on, I think it's on YouTube, it's on my website, which is great promotion there. There it is. So the talk, hashtag work school hours, it gives a whole lot of detail about it. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste of it now. Also, I'm excited, it's going to be a TED talk in a couple of months, so that's just a wee brag. But anyway, so it's good, right? The stuff's important. So work school hours, the concept or the fundamental gist of this is that we live in a society where the schedule of the children is different to the schedule of the adults. And to me, that is absolutely bonkers. Like I cannot understand how we live in a modern day society where these two are different. And when I talked about before the construct of work and how archaic it is and how it's designed for a man who was not a primary caregiver of a child because the man was in the workforce and the woman wasn't, yet for decades, they've both been in the workforce, they're both responsible for the kids, yet our structures have not changed. And so one of the findings from this piece of research, and there was kind of two, and they're roughly even. So the mums, and then as it grew into dads as well, when they talked about their experiences of being a working parent, they fell into kind of one of two categories. And as I say, they were roughly even. Either they returned to work full time. And what that meant, great, they're working full time, but they missed their children. They talked about the fact that they resented that they didn't get to do all the things with their kids that they wanted. And they also resented the cost associated with childcare. Oh my God, it's so expensive. And so that was an issue. Or the other half of the group, they negotiated some kind of a part-time arrangement. So maybe that was if they had really young children, maybe they worked only say 6 days a week. If they had school-age children, perhaps they worked shorter hours to accommodate school pickups. But what happened with these women is that, sorry, I say women, that was the majority of the data set, so I need to be careful there, parents, because again, I've interviewed dads now as well. What happened with these people is that they would organise the reduced hours contract, great, and so instead of being on a 40-hour contract, they might be, say, on a 25 or a 30-hour contract, right? So they become a, I don't know the math, 0.6, 0.8 of an FTE. And therefore their pay got reduced, right? That sounds fair, you know, less hours, less pay. But their outputs were not reduced. So what happened is that they still had the exact same workload as their full-time colleagues, or the exact same workload as they had before they went on parental leave. And they were now really efficient because they were doing it in shorter hours. Often what was happening is that they were still doing it maybe after hours anyway. So they'd do it on their days off or they'd do it into the evenings. But what was actually most prominent is that they just became more efficient. You know, when the saying, you know, if you want something done, ask a busy person. It's truth in that. Busy people get really good at becoming efficient. Their productivity rate goes up because they got a bit more shit into a smaller amount of time. And so these parents on reduced hours contracts were generally still doing the same, or not exactly the same, certainly not in correlation with the pay reduction, right? So maybe the pay was reduced this much and the workload was only reduced a little bit, if that makes sense. And what I found really frustrating with this group is that most of them, and the large majority of them, they talked about how lucky they felt. The word lucky came up so many times. Like, oh gosh, I'm so lucky that my employer allows me to work less hours. Gosh, I'm lucky to work in a place that gives me a reduced hours contract. Lucky, lucky, lucky. And it was after I kept hearing this, and I was like, this is bullshit. There's nothing lucky about getting a pay cut to do the same job, right? Instead of giving them a pay cut for doing the same job, why don't we look at rewarding that increase in productivity and increase in efficiency and actually rate and value that instead of giving them a pay cut? So they were kind of, the very depressing findings, to be honest, in terms of the two groups. Either they work full-time and miss their kids, or they work part-time and just keep paying less to do the same amount. Because all these organisations are really profiting off this. And I thought more and more about, well, what is the cause of this, and keep researching and digging into it. And what I found is that what I truly believe that the root cause of this is the misalignment between school and work. And there's two parts of that, right? So there's the hours, obviously school finishes early, but there's also the school holidays. So there's these two parts, and it just makes it absolutely phenomenally difficult. So I'm not even there yet, by the way. My kids are, as I say, 1.5 and 4, so they're not even at school yet. I'm already thinking, I don't know how the hell we would go with both of us, my husband and I, in full-time jobs, when Toby starts school in a couple of terms. Like, how the hell does it work? And so when I talk to all these parents, and I've interviewed, the original data set was 82, which was exclusively mums, but it's grown out to, and it's growing, about 500 people now. So I'll talk, obviously, to anyone who will listen to me about this. I get really excited about it. So more and more people tell me their stories, and I just haven't yet found a story that grossly negates those two sets of findings, right? So yeah, not everyone has exactly that experience, but give or take, they're the two options, right? You either work full-time and don't get to see your kids after school, or you work part-time, you get less pay, and you probably do a similar amount of outputs, workload, right? I genuinely, I'd love to talk to more people that has not been the case for them, but it is. And so, again, coming back to my point of how do we remove barriers in the workplace for women, and actually removing barriers that will be good for men as well. And again, even for non-parents, this is not just about people that have children. If we make it the norm that actually the core part of the day is within school hours. Now, I'll pause for a second. I'm really passionate about this, and I'm not going to be shy about it. That's my dream for the world, is work school hours. I'm going to push the shit out of this. I think that that's how the workplace should go. That work hours should align with school hours, and that should also be the case during the year in terms of terms. So I'm going to keep pushing that. I'm not going to be shy about it. But I am pragmatic, and I'm a realist. And I know that some people in the room might be thinking, well, that's quite a big pill to swallow. Great idea, Ellen, lovely in theory, but that's probably not going to work for us. And it's almost too overwhelming. So what I want to do here is just talk about how you can transition towards that and how you can think about the principles of it. So if an organization is not necessarily ready to do that tomorrow, and I get it, you wouldn't do it overnight. That would probably be quite bad for your business. But how do you kind of adopt the principles of this in terms of how do we make things easier for our working parents? Now, working parents, by the way, roughly 80% of the population become parents, which is quite a big chunk. Actually quite a big chunk. And even people that don't become parents, I think everyone can understand that children are the future, right? So if we want to have we want this human race to continue, we need people to populate. So children are quite important for our survival as a race, but also they're the future workforce, right? So even people who think, well, I've chosen not to have kids and that's cool, but I hope they can still get that children are quite an important thing for the future. And that probably it would be a good thing if the stress that parents face could be reduced somewhat. And when I talk about the stress that all these parents told me in these interviews, we're talking, I'm probably just telling people to suck eggs here, right? But, your kids are at school for quite easily sort of a two-decade period of your career that they're living at home, right? And so 2 decades, that's a long time where every single day of the week, you're like, what the heck do I do with my kids after school? What the heck do I do at school holidays? Like, everyone's like stressed. It's a real problem. And that stress impacts their performance at work. And I think this is what organizations sometimes forget, is that it's not just some happy clappy thing that, oh yeah, I don't really care if my staff are happy, I just need them to rock up and do their job. And that was kind of a mentality a decade or two ago, right? is that, leave your personal stuff at home. I don't care about your personal shit. I just need you to turn up and do your job. And that's what I care about. But what we now know, and there's so much research to back it up, is happier staff perform better. There's, I could list out so many different research papers that have been done that show that if you invest in staff well-being and invest in staff being happy, feeling engaged, all that kind of, lovely soft stuff, actually it leads to good hard outcomes in terms of profits, right? So it actually is really important. Sorry, I digress a little bit there. Coming back to the kind of practical ways that organisations can look at this. So again, I acknowledge not everyone's going to be like, right, tomorrow we're knocking off 3 every day and you're going to do 10-week blocks to match the school term. That's what I want. Again, I'm not going to be shy about it. That's my goal for the world. But in the interim, until we achieve that, how can organisations take some of these principles and apply them? And the first thing I would say is that organisations, if they talk to their staff and say, look, this is the goal, I want to do better as an organisation to accommodate parents, because that, again, is one of the biggest things that you could do to have a meaningful impact on the increased representation of women at all levels and at leadership levels. Fundamentally, you can do all other lovely initiatives, but that is the biggest one to have a real impact. And there's a whole lot of research, not just mine, but other research papers as well that have shown that. So start with talking with your staff, again, parents and non-parents, about how can we make this more accommodating? And how can we do this without decreasing outputs? Because again, I get it, organisations need to worry about the bottom line. I do get that. So talk to your staff about how can we still achieve what we need to achieve, but maybe do it in shorter hours, or maybe we can move things around to make it more doable for parents. And what I've been quite chuffed about is that when I've had these conversations with people that are doing this kind of thing, they're really amazed at how innovative and creative staff can be. So if you say to a staff member, hey, I'd love to accommodate this, that you could finish at 2:30 every day, how do you think that might be able to happen? They come up with lots of ideas. When people are motivated sufficiently, they're pretty clever at coming up with ways to do their job faster, to become more productive, to be more efficient. So that's the first thing, is talk, basically talk with your staff and find out about it. The second thing is kind of what I'd say, like phasing maybe, or just like incremental. So maybe organisations, just as a starting point, could be like, hey, maybe one day a fortnight, we're going to finish at 2:30. We're just going to see what happens. We'll just do a trial of it for a few months, see what happens, see that maybe the wheels don't fall off, and actually maybe everybody does still get their stuff done. And then maybe after that, we could do it once a week and see what happens there. And literally just test and adjust, give it a bit of a whirl, see what happens, and make a tangible step towards this. And even if you don't end up getting all the way to the dream of finishing in time for school collection every single day, even parents would appreciate if that happened, say, once a week, that would still make a meaningful difference to them, which would make a meaningful contribution to improving the representation of women. That's the second one. What was I say the first one was? Oh, yeah, first is talking to your staff, and then the second one is around phasing. The third one is, sorry, I'm having a mind blank here, is around getting clear on scheduling. So as workers, there are lots of things that have to be done with your peers in co-working type spaces, right? So whether that's, say, team meetings, whether it's, I suppose events like this, or whether it's, I know in Taranaki, we had a team day today. There are certainly things where you need all the team together, right? So that's cool, get that. But there's actually a lot of work that individuals do that doesn't necessarily require other people. They can, right, I've got to go off and do this stuff by myself. So what you can look at from a scheduling point of view is look at, okay, how do we schedule the core stuff or the team stuff, say within school hours, and then allow people the agency or the autonomy to do the other things when it suits them, which might be, for some people, it suits them to start earlier in the morning. For others, maybe it's a bit of evening work. For others, maybe they just get efficient and they don't actually need to do either of those two things. But one of the things I advise people is maybe just consider stop setting meetings at 4 o'clock. Maybe just try have team meetings within school hours. So that's another one. The fourth one, so this last point, is around focusing on outputs instead of inputs. So when I talk about inputs, that's the hours that staff do, right? That's their inputs. Instead of focusing so much at did they work between 9 and 5, let's focus more on the outputs, what it is that they actually delivered. Now, this is not a really foreign concept. So if you think about it, as a manager, when you're in a position that you think, I need to take on a new staff member, what usually happens is you think, I need these tasks to be done, and we can't do them within our current resourcing, so we're going to have to employ someone to do those tasks. So why don't we then just remunerate them and manage them to do those tasks? But instead what happens, we're like, great, we need someone to do those tasks. But what I'm going to do is make sure that they sit at that desk at 9 o'clock in the morning and they stay there till 5 o'clock, and that's what I'm going to measure. And that's what I'm going to remunerate. Instead of measuring and remunerating the thing that you actually employed them for in the first place. So to conclude, right now, we are in the middle of the Great Resignation. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. We are facing a mental health crisis. Workers across the country are genuinely struggling in that area. New Zealand is doing terribly when it comes to productivity. And I don't say that in a kind of a nasty way about New Zealand, but it's true. That the other thing is New Zealand is not doing well in productivity. We have more discussions now around rectifying social inequities. And so all of these things together, plus the technological advances, we're kind of in the middle of this perfect storm, almost a burning platform, that the way we have been doing things for the last 100 years is not going to work going forward. And so I see this as the most exciting and incredible opportunity to look at how we can do things differently, how we can structure things better. And again, my passion is because I want to make it better for women, because that's kind of my starting point. But also in tandem, it's going to make it good for the organisation. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.